Welcome back to Mind Bent. Let's look at something we all do but rarely talk about with total honesty.
Welcome back to Mind Bent. Let us look at something that is almost certainly somewhere in your home right now, something tucked away quietly enough that you forget it most days and remember it at the exact wrong moments. There is probably a box, a folder, a stack of folded pages, letters you wrote and never sent, some to people who hurt you, some to people you loved, some to earlier versions of yourself. You kept them, and you have never quite been able to explain why, not even to yourself. Maybe the letter was written at 1 a.m. after a fight that ended a friendship. Maybe it was addressed to a parent who died before you found the right words. Maybe it was a love letter you finished on a Tuesday, fully intended to give, and then folded back into your pocket on Wednesday because the moment passed. And now it is just there, in the box, doing what it has always done, waiting. You call this a bad habit. You call it avoidance. You tell yourself you should either send them or throw them away, and because you can do neither, you do nothing, and then you feel quietly bad about doing nothing. That is the loop. That is what this is about. But there is a more accurate and considerably kinder way to understand what that box is actually doing. Looking at this from the observation deck, the keeping is not avoidance. It is something much more specific. Those letters are bookmarks. They mark the exact page in a relationship, a grief, a version of yourself where the story stopped mid-sentence, and your brain, being the relentlessly task-oriented organ it is, has flagged every single one of them as unfinished. Think of your mind as a library. Most of your memories get filed, shelved, returned to occasionally and left in peace, but an unsent letter is a book left open on the reading table. The library cannot close, the lights stay on. Someone has to come back and deal with it eventually, and until they do, the library hums. I lived inside that hum for years. Not because I was broken, but because I had accumulated a considerable reading table. In 2007, Jeremy Gray and colleagues published findings on the default mode network, the brain's resting state circuit, the system that activates not when you are focused on a task, but when you are doing nothing in particular. Staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep, sitting in traffic. Gray's research identified this network as the substrate of rumination, the mental state where unresolved problems are replayed in loop. The default mode network does not distinguish between a problem you solved and forgot and a problem you chose not to solve. To it, an open loop is an open loop. And an unsent letter is one of the clearest open loops the human mind can generate. You articulated the feeling, you organized it into language, you brought it to the edge of resolution, and then you stopped. The letter exists in a state of permanent, almost, and your default mode network treats that almost as a standing instruction to keep checking. This is what cognitive psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect. The brain assigns disproportionate mental weight to incomplete tasks. Unfinished things occupy more of your working memory than finished ones, even when you are not consciously thinking about them. The box in your drawer is not just a box. It is a list of open tabs, and your brain has been running them in the background for months, possibly years, every time your attention drops below a certain threshold. That is the 3 a.m. replay. That is the strange tightening in your chest when you move apartments and find the box again. That is not sentiment alone. That is a filing system trying to do its job with incomplete instructions. So, what do you do with a library that cannot close? You do not have to send the letters. That is the first thing to understand. Sending them is one resolution. It is not the only one. and for many of these letters it is not even the appropriate one. The person you addressed it to may be dead. The relationship may be genuinely over. The version of yourself who needed to say those words may no longer exist in the same form. Sending is not the point. The point is closure in the cognitive sense, not emotional closure, which is a myth, but task closure, which is real and achievable and surprisingly small. Here is what that can look like in practice. First, date the envelope. If your letters are undated, take them out one at a time and write on the outside the approximate month and year they were written. Not as a filing exercise, as a signal to your nervous system that this event has a timestamp. It happened in a specific place in time. It is not still happening. The default mode network calms when a task is given a boundary, because a boundary is a form of completion. A date is a gentle way of saying, this is where that story lives. Second, change the physical container. Not the letters themselves, just the box. Move them from a cardboard shoebox with no lid to something with a clasp, a tin, a cloth bag with a drawstring, anything that requires a deliberate action to open. This is what attachment researchers call a transitional object ritual, a small physical gesture that encodes a psychological shift. The action of closing the clasp is your body being told the tab is not deleted, but it is minimized. You chose to put it down. That is different from it being unresolved. Third, read one. Just one. Not the hardest one. Pick the one you are least afraid of. Read it without the intention of deciding anything. You are not deciding whether to send it. You are not deciding whether the feeling was justified. You are simply letting the words be witnessed by you, by the only reader who was always supposed to receive them. Your default mode network activates most powerfully when something is incomplete and unacknowledged. Acknowledging it, even silently, even privately, reduces the signal. Fourth, write a one-line postscript on the back of the envelope, not on the letter itself, which is finished and belongs to the past. On the envelope, something like, I understand this now, or I was 26 and frightened, or I still mean every word. 5 seconds, 1 sentence. What you are doing is adding a closing chapter, an author's note, a small editorial marker that says, I came back to this. The book is still on the shelf, but someone returned to it. You are allowed to keep the letters. That is not the problem. The problem was never the keeping. The problem is the keeping without acknowledgement. The open loop that runs because no one has told the library the patron has checked out. You did not fail to resolve these things because you are avoidant or undisciplined or emotionally immature. You kept them because some part of you understood correctly that the feelings in those letters were real and deserved a container. The box is not a monument to your avoidance. It is evidence of your emotional intelligence, imperfectly expressed. Your past unsending was not cowardice. In most cases, it was discernment. You knew the moment was not right. Sometimes the moment never came. That is not a failure. That is just how time moves. Gray's research gives us one more useful piece of this. The default mode network quiets not through more thinking, but through either active task focus or somatic attention, which means physical, present moment awareness. This is why the small rituals matter. Dating the envelope is a physical act. Closing the clasp is a physical act. Writing a postscript is a physical act. You are not thinking your way out of the open loop. You are closing it with your hands. Take a breath. Feel the floor beneath you. Design one ritual today, just one. Find the box. Pick one letter. Write the date on the outside. That is all. Watch how much quieter the library gets by morning. If this helped you see that box a little differently today, I invite you to subscribe and stay with us. We are here every week to keep observing without judgment and with total clarity. I will see you in the next one. If you have a box like this, I want to know what you did with it. Tell me in the comments. I read every reply.
If this perspective helped you see your own pattern a little more clearly today, click subscribe. Until next time.